Hey, how you doing?
Good, good. How are you?
All is well. All is well. Thank you so much for coming on the platform. This is truly an honor. I really appreciate you taking out the time to stop by to talk to us about some of the amazing work that you've been doing.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Definitely, it's an honor. For the viewers who may not recognize you, could you let them know who you are and definitely where you're from?
So yeah, sure. I am Noah van Dongen. I'm from the Netherlands, from Rotterdam to be exactly. I work at the University of Amsterdam at the Psychological Methods Group.
Wow. Okay. Okay. The Netherlands is definitely one of my favorite countries. I'm a world traveler. I've been all around the world. I've been to 70 countries, but that's definitely one of the most amazing places that I've had the opportunity to visit. Yeah. Yeah. So let me see. Okay. Now I want to ask you this. Now, when did you develop this passion for art and philosophy and methodology? Is this something that you kind of got into at an early age, or did you kind of develop this later on
Uh,
in life?
well, let's. I think it starts in high school where I was bored out of my mind, and I saw a drawing of I think it was Goku from Dragon Ball Z on the desk, and I thought, oh, I want to draw like that. So I spent most of my high school years trying to draw Dragon Ball Z characters, and uh, and that's how I got interested in art and drawing. And I tried my hand at industrial development at the Technical University in Delft. But what I liked about that was just the drawing and making technical drawings instead of the math and the industrial design. So I went to the art academy to learn how to draw and to paint, and I started to question why we as humans make art and appreciate art. And all my teachers told me that it's subjective. It's all subjective. So it's and that's weird. It cannot be all subjective, all personal preferences, because otherwise, how can it be art academies and how can you judge whether my work is any good? So I said, okay, well, if I want to figure this out, I need to go somewhere else. So I went to university and did a master's in arts and culture studies. And there they said, yes, there is something intersubjective. There is a way of evaluating art, but it's all cultural. And I said, well, that's also weird. That can also not be the case, because then I would expect there to be some cultures without art, and I expect it to be very difficult for different cultures to appreciate each other's art. And that's also not the case, right? So even though each culture has their own artistic traditions, we still appreciate each other's artwork, and there are some similarities. So that's how I got into to the more psychological and neuroscientific approach to art appreciation, also more philosophy. But there was no research projects on this kind of perspective on art appreciation. So I tried to get a PhD, tried to get funding, but nobody had any jobs and nobody had any funding. So I looked for something else, and then I got into philosophy of science. There was an interesting project on philosophy of science, and did a PhD there. So now I was doing a PhD in philosophy of science, but in the meantime, I also did uh, a lot of research on art appreciation. So in the end, I did a PhD in both. So I completed a PhD in research and art appreciation and a PhD on philosophy of science.
Wow, okay, that's real cool. That's real cool. Big shout out to Dragon Ball Z, definitely a staple in the cartoon world. Now, I wanted to ask you this. Now, what about your family history? Were there artists in your family or people that went to school for similar things, or were you the first?
So I have a great uncle who did who went to art academy, but then into marketing development. So he made commercials, and my mother also did art academy, but never finished it.
Okay, okay. Now, for some of the viewers who may not know the difference, what exactly is like philosophy of science and methodology and psychological methods and stuff like that? What exactly does that mean?
Um, Yeah. So philosophy of science is that we can say a particular field of science, and it yeah, it centers on questions like, so what is science? What makes science different from any other endeavor for gathering knowledge? How do we how do we test our theories, our hypotheses? What is a scientific theory, and how do we distinguish anything? So an explanation from mere description, for instance. So these kinds of questions are what's being tackled by philosophy of science. And it's much broader than that, but that's what I am primarily engaged with. Um, so, I have a PhD in philosophy of science, but I never had any, let's say, formal training in philosophy of science. So I have no bachelor's, no master's. I just went into a PhD, and after that, I went immediately out of philosophy of science and started working at the psychometrics group, so the psychological methods, and there they work on psychological tests, right? So many things are not directly observable, right? So we cannot we don't directly observe someone's intelligence or certain personality traits. We only observe behavior. And then we would like to say, okay, we need to develop tests that get at these things that we want to know about. Right? For instance, someone's math ability, and how do we connect people's responses on a math test to their overall ability? How do we gauge the difficulty of math items? How do we construct good math tests? And how do we keep track of someone's progress as they go through their cognitive development through high school, for instance? And so that's not all what psychological methods is about, but the core of psychometrics is about tests, psychological tests.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's very, very interesting. Now, you actually do some work with the law school as well?
Yeah. So that is I I keep rolling into my career development is as I already told you, is a bit of a meandering path, and there's no clear straight line from where I started and where I ended up now. So for some reason, I now ended up as a methodologist at the law faculty, where I advise legal scholars on how to do empirical research. So a lot of legal scholarly work is on the interpretation of laws, proposals for legal proposals, going through jurisprudence. However, a large part of the law is also how it's not only how it's interpreted, but also how it's applied and how it's followed by us, let's say, regular citizens. So compliance, so how, and also how people deal with the law. Right? So it's not that we follow the law because we fear punishment, but we follow the law because, well, we have these ingrained norms, ethics, things like that. So not only is it about how the law is formulated, but also how is it interpreted, how it is applied, and that is an empirical question. So there you need to go on the streets, you need to ask people, need to do experiments, you need to interview people, and that is something that a lot of legal scholars are slowly getting into. So that's why I was hired to assist these legal scholars in their empirical research.
Wow. Okay, that's really inspiring that you're able to excel in multiple fields. Some people just dream of being successful at one thing. Is it difficult for you to kind of get into all of these different fields, or is it more motivating for you to do things like that?
So the let's say that most academics have a bit of an imposter syndrome, and I'm no exception in the sense that I know of many things a little bit, but I am an expert in none of them, right? So there, everywhere I go, there are people that know a lot more about things than I do. It's just that I have a very broad, let's say, knowledge base. So I can assist all these legal scholars with, well, I've read something here, I did a little bit there, I know of some people who are working on something similar. So I'm typically a bit of a go-between that knows a little bit about the things they need to know about, and I get them the resources and the contacts and the methods they need. But then I need to do either I need to do a lot of reading, or I need to figure stuff out on the fly, um, or do other stuff to get me into the material.
Oh, okay, okay. I definitely understand. You mentioned imposter syndrome. Man, that's really a real thing. But obviously, you've been able to use it, for something very, very positive. You're able to assist a multitude of people, and the work that you're doing is definitely planting some major seeds. Let me see. Oh, okay. Now I wanted to ask you about this. I got a chance to check out one of the videos on YouTube. If you could talk about, I guess, the contrast on art appreciation, the lab that you did. What inspired you to even do that, and what were the results?
Okay, well, that's a while ago, right? So that was an interview I did for the International Film Festival in Rotterdam, and it's based on so this is based on my art appreciation PhD, and so there is this neurologist, I think, it's Indian, Ramachandran. He wrote a book, The Telltale Brain, and he has a paper that he mentions in there on, let's say, a evolutionary theory of aesthetics. And it's a bit of a there it's not, well, it's a bit of a controversial theory, but there are a few interesting principles in there on and potential explanations for how we started to develop art. Right, so it's not the entire story, but there are a few interesting biological principles. For instance, it is as well as species that evolved over time. Uh, it is good that we have, well, so some kind of survival mechanisms, also in terms of our perception and how we see things, and being able to distinguish, let's say, red fruits from, or, well, the contrasting fruits from their background, from the foliage, is something that would be, well, nice to be able to do, and also that we continue to pay attention to these things. So there could be some feedback there, some positive emotional response to being able to see contrasting things, or also being able to put diverse aspects together into a coherent whole. Right. For instance, you see a few yellow and brown patches to the green foliage, which you can connect into, well, the shape of a lion, for instance, and being able to quickly do these things, and to that your attention immediately goes to these things and gives you a positive emotional feedback that you're capable of doing that, might form some kind of basis for our, well, let's say, our aesthetics. So we had the idea, okay, well, let's see if that is indeed true. So we set up a very simple experiment. We collected from the digital collections of, or digitized collections of museums, several paintings. We made copies of each painting, where we increased the light dark contrast, luminosity contrast on one copy, and decreased it on the other. So there's completely identical, except that the darkers are darker and the lights are darker on one copy, and it's the reverse in the other copy. And then we presented these paintings, or these, well, digital copies, to our participants, and said, okay, which of the two do you prefer? And and to a large extent, a very large extent, people prefer the increased contrast versions over the decreased contrast versions. And even so, if you keep the original contrast and you compare it to the increased contrast, they appreciate the increased contrast still more than the original contrast. The difference is not as profound as when you decrease the content, but it's still there. It's still, well, meaningfully large, which, when you think about it, is maybe a bit obvious, because if you look at the original Instagram filters for the app, most of them increase contrast, and only a few of the Instagram filters decrease contrast. Right? So this is one of the studies that I did, and the other interesting is that there's an EEG study that we did on our emotional response to artworks versus non-artworks. And that there's not it's the difference is that we said, okay, we're going to present you with a bunch of pictures, and the difference was that, okay, these are hyper realistic paintings, uh, scenes from actors that play out the scene, or other kind of or digitally rendered pictures for an artwork. Or we said, these are real photographs from an archive, they're from news articles, they're family photos, things like that. And they depicted very happy things like puppies and playing children, and very nasty things like car crashes and other kind of horrific scenes. And we looked at their EEG response, and so it's the immediate emotional attention response that you see when you just view the picture. And it showed that when they expect to see paintings or artworks, this emotional response is attenuated. So you can say there's some kind of emotional distance they take from artworks when it comes to the expectation of seeing real things. I think that was the interview was about.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. That's very, very interesting. You had made some mention of a film festival. Now, have you ever participated or considered creating a documentary based on any of the research or the work that you have been a part of?
Um, so to be completely honest, no. So actually, I do a lot of research, and I write papers, and as many academics do, and the expectation is that other people read your work and do something with your work. But I have noticed that every time some people tell me, well, I've read your work, it was highly interesting, we are going to do this with it. I am surprised. So I do research, I noticed, for me, because I find it interesting, not because I want to do anything else with it. So it's always an, uh, an interesting surprise when I notice, or people tell me that they read my work.
Okay, okay. I mean, it sounds interesting, man. I'm sure people would definitely tune in to something like that. But I can ask you this. Now, you mentioned writing a lot of papers. Have you started on the book or considered turning any of the papers into books?
Well, to be completely honest, you're going to be the first person I tell, but my work is on theory development at the moment. So how do we develop scientific theories? How do we figure out what we want to explain? How do we evaluate whether our theory is actually explaining what it's supposed to explain? And there is not a lot of methods on there. So I've received a grant to do research on it for the next 3 to 4 years, and the plan is to turn that into a book. And then, in this sense, a textbook. So, how do we teach our students to develop scientific theories? Because in psychology and in a lot of social sciences, we are taught a lot of statistics, so how to test hypotheses, but we're not taught how to get to these predictions. So we're supposed to just get a theory out of thin air, then derive predictions from the theory, and then our teaching kicks in, and then we have a lot of ways of testing these predictions. But everything before that is something you just have to figure out on your own.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. Now, I wanted to ask you about something I had seen on your profile for the university. You had spoke about the consequences of scientific reforms. Would you be able to speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So, um, I'm not sure how much your viewers knows about what happened over the last decade in psychological science. So I'll just give a brief summary. Um, so about 13 years ago, we realized as a field that a lot of the studies we thought were provided rock solid results, things we could trust, actually did not replicate. Right. So we one of the benchmarks of science is that that if I do an experiment, I get certain results. If somebody else repeats the experiment, they get similar results. Right. That we know that we are dealing with something we can work with instead of a statistical fluke or something that happened by chance. And we thought that we had all these interesting effects in psychology, and we trusted these findings. They were in textbooks, and then people started to dig in and see, if we are very rigorous about our methods, if we take high-powered studies, so we take a lot of participants, we control these studies very well, can we replicate these findings? And it turned out that it wasn't the case. So there are many replication studies have been done over the last decade, and I think between 35 and 60% of studies replicate. That's still a decent amount, but a lot less than we expected initially. So that's why, people were very alarmed. Okay, we need to change. We need to update how we do science. And these reforms consist of increased transparency, in the sense that, okay, we need to share our data, we need to share our analysis plan, we need to share our code, so people can check whether or not what we're doing makes sense. And also we need to, so if we're going to test some kind of prediction, it's good that we are upfront about this prediction. So we pre-register this prediction, so I cannot, after I did the study, change my prediction to fit the data. And also what happened is there's a high publication bias. So we as researchers are not only doing research, but the primarily way we check the quality of our output is through academic publications in academic journals. And positive findings are, for various reasons, more interesting than findings that, are negative. So there's no difference, or my prediction didn't pan out. So there's an incentive to ignore negative findings and to only publish positive findings, which resulted in a lot of, let's say, false positive results. So there are all these countermeasures to get all these negative results out of, let's say, people's proverbial file drawers, and to also try to get people to publish these negative findings. And there are various other scientific reforms. So these things are happening at the moment, and also people are trying to not evaluate scientists only on the number of papers they publish, but also on things like outreach, right? So what I'm doing right now would be considered a value to outside of academia, right? So doing podcasts, providing opinions on things outside of academia, also teaching courses outside of academia. These are all things that are evaluated scientific output beyond just publishing papers in journals.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. Like you say, if somebody finds something negative, then it's not as publicized, or it's not as valuable, but it still doesn't, paint the entire picture of science. So we need some of those, negative findings as well.
Yeah, so it's very cool. Yeah, so it is, so the negative findings are valuable for science, but they're not interesting, or let's say valuable to the scientist, right? So there's this very, very counterintuitive finding, was highly publicized and made this scientist's career, which was that when you give people a task when they need to find words, in a word, well, in a word scramble, right? So you have this matrix of letters, right? You need to find vertical and horizontal words, and one group got elderly words, geriatric words, right? So that it's gray, pension, wheelchair, things like that. All these things that have an association with elderly people. And the other group got words that were just, well, neutral, red, chair, things like that. And then they timed how long it took them from walking from the experiment room to the elevator. And in this study, the elderly primed people, well, took longer on average to get to the elevator. Which the interpretation was, well, then it is some kind of embodied cognition. So you feel elderly if you are primed with elderly words. Highly interesting. Well, was publicized everywhere. This effect did not replicate, but it is a positive finding. And if this researcher found, okay, there's no difference, that's not very interesting. Right? So this the no difference, the null finding, the negative finding, is so boring that nobody would publish this, right? And this is something that happened across, and is probably still happening across science, and especially in psychology.
Wow, wow, okay. You really opened my eyes to some things. I really appreciate you sharing that, and also as well, taking out the time to come on the platform. I want to thank you again because I realize how many, different hats you're wearing. You have a lot of things going on, and for you to, stop what you're doing to come by to, share some of that with the viewers is definitely an honor, and I really appreciate you, and I look forward to the work that you have coming in the future as well.
Well, thank you for having me. It was an enjoyable conversation.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And I want to thank the viewers for tuning in. And until next time, peace.
Okay, bye.
Bye bye.